She looked me dead in the eyes, wine glass in hand, that designer dress shimmering under the chandelier lights. And she said, loud enough for the entire room to hear, "Oh, look, the handyman is here." And everyone laughed. My own brother laughed. My sister-in-law laughed. The cousins, the aunts, the uncles, they all laughed. 50 people in that banquet hall, and every single one of them pointed their eyes at me like I was the punchline to a joke they'd been waiting years to tell. My cheeks burned. My hands tightened around the wrapped gift I was holding, a gift I'd spent 3 weeks saving up to buy. I stood in the doorway of my brother's engagement party in my best button-down shirt, the one I'd ironed twice that morning, and I felt something crack inside my chest. Not from anger, from grief. Because the woman sneering at me was about to marry my brother. She was about to become family. And she had just made it perfectly clear what she thought of me. But here's the part she didn't see coming. Here's the part none of them saw coming. My son was standing right beside me, 17 years old, quiet, sharp as a razor blade, and he reached over and put his hand on my arm. He looked up at me with the calmest eyes I have ever seen on a young man. And he said softly, so only I could hear, "Dad, stay calm. I've got a plan." I didn't know what that meant in that moment. I didn't know that those 5 words were the beginning of everything changing. I didn't know that within 18 months, that woman's smirk would be the thing she regretted most in her entire life. But I'm getting ahead of myself. If you're new here, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now because this story is long, it is painful, and the ending is going to make your jaw drop. Let's go back to the beginning. My name is Gary Whitfield. I'm 53 years old now, but when this story begins, I was 51. I live in a mid-sized town in Ohio, not the kind of place people write movies about. It's the kind of place you either grow up and leave or you grow up and stay. I stayed, not because I lacked ambition. Not because I was scared to try something bigger. I stayed because when my wife Donna got sick 15 years ago, really sick, the kind of sick that requires someone to be home, to be present, to be there, I made a choice. I chose her. I gave up a promising position at an engineering firm in Columbus. I came back home. I became a general contractor. Not glamorous. Not the kind of job that gets you invited to dinner parties, but it's honest work, hard work. Work that leaves calluses on your hands and satisfaction in your chest at the end of a long day. I built things. I fixed things. I showed up when people called and I did the job right and I went home. Donna passed 8 years ago, breast cancer. She fought hard, harder than anyone I've ever known, and she lost. And when she was gone, I was left with a 12-year-old boy named Marcus, just the 2 of us. Marcus Whitfield, my son. My whole world. He was quiet like his mother. Thoughtful like his mother. He had this way of watching a situation, really watching it, absorbing every detail, before he ever said a word. Kids at school thought he was shy. They were wrong. He wasn't shy. He was calculating. Not in a cold way, in a strategic way. In the way that you realize years later means someone is going to be exceptional. I poured everything I had into that boy. Every dollar I saved beyond the bills. Every evening after work. Every weekend when I could have been watching football or sleeping in, I was at his science fairs, his debate competitions, his robotics club meetings. He was everything to me. Now, my brother. Let me tell you about my brother, Daniel Whitfield. 3 years younger than me. If I had to describe Daniel in one sentence, it would be this. Daniel was born believing the world owed him something. I don't say that with hatred. I say it with the particular exhaustion of someone who spent 5 decades watching it in action. Daniel was the younger son, the charming one. The one who could walk into a room and make everyone smile. Who could talk his way out of anything. Who could convince our mother that whatever trouble he'd gotten into was somehow someone else's fault. And our mother, God rest her soul, she believed him. Every single time. Our father passed when I was 19 and Daniel was 16. Heart attack. Sudden. Devastating. Dad left behind a small amount of money. Not a fortune, but enough. He also left behind his workshop tools, his truck, and a piece of land outside of town that had been in the Whitfield family for 3 generations. That land. That's important. Remember that land. According to our father's original wishes, communicated verbally to our mother many times, That land was supposed to be split between Daniel and me when the time came. But our mother had a blind spot the size of the Ohio sky when it came to Daniel. She updated her will when I wasn't paying attention. She changed things without telling me. And when she passed 4 years ago, 6 months after Donna, so you can imagine what those years were like for me, I found out that the land, all of it, had been left to Daniel. Along with most of her savings, I got Dad's workshop tools, some furniture, a few boxes of old photographs. Daniel got everything else. I remember sitting in that lawyer's office, listening to the will being read, and feeling a strange, distant feeling, like I was watching it happen to someone else through a foggy window. I didn't fight it. I didn't yell. I didn't accuse Daniel of influencing our mother, even though I suspected it. Even though the timing was suspicious, I let it go. Because I was grieving, because I was exhausted. Because I had a 15-year-old boy at home who needed his father to hold it together. And because, foolishly, naively, I still believed in family. I still believed that blood meant something. Daniel sold a portion of the land immediately. He bought a new house in one of those neighborhoods with the brick mailboxes and the HOA newsletters. He got a new truck. He started dressing differently, nicer, more expensive. He joined a country club. And he began, slowly, to look at me the way people look at something they used to own but have since traded up from. We still saw each other at family gatherings. We still exchanged calls on birthdays, but something had shifted. The balance of something invisible between us had tipped. And then he met Renee Calloway. She came from money. Not old money, new money, the aggressive kind, the kind that announces itself. Her father owned a chain of car dealerships across 3 counties. She had long dark hair, a sharp smile, and the confidence of someone who had never once in her life been told no. She was beautiful in the way that expensive things are beautiful, polished, deliberate, slightly intimidating. And when Daniel brought her around for the first time at a family cookout, I could see immediately that she was assessing all of us, not meeting us. Assessing us. She shook my hand that day, and her eyes traveled from my work boots to my calloused palms to my old blue truck in the driveway, and she smiled. It was the kind of smile that isn't really a smile at all. It's a measurement. I thought, this woman is going to be a problem. I pushed the thought away. I told myself I was being unfair. Daniel seemed happy. And she was charming when she wanted to be, warm, even, in small doses. She laughed at people's jokes. She brought wine to dinners. She asked questions and maintained eye contact and said all the right things. So I gave her the benefit of the doubt. That was my second mistake. My first was letting the inheritance go without a fight. The engagement was announced at Thanksgiving. Daniel stood up at the dinner table and gave a little speech, and everyone applauded, and Renee held out her hand to show the ring. Enormous, glittering, precisely the kind of ring you buy to be seen. There were tears and hugs and champagne. I hugged my brother. I meant it. I congratulated Renee. I meant that too. And then the party planning began. The engagement party was set for a Saturday night in February. A banquet hall on the east side of town. The nice one, the kind with the vaulted ceilings and the open bar and tables draped in white linen. I bought a gift. Took me 3 weeks of careful saving from my contracting jobs because it had been a slow winter. I got them a beautiful hand-engraved serving set, silver-plated, their initials on the handles. I knew Renee appreciated things like that, presentation, elegance. I drove over with Marcus. He was 17 by then. Tall, quiet, wearing the jacket we'd bought him for his debate tournament the previous spring. We walked in together. And that's when it happened. The moment I had described at the beginning. We'd barely crossed the threshold when Renee's voice cut through the room like a blade. Loud, clear, perfectly timed. "Oh, look, the handyman is here." She said it to the group of women she was standing with, her friends, her mother, a few cousins. But she said it loud enough for the whole room. Deliberately loud. And then the laughter. God, that laughter. Not all of it was cruel. Some people were just nervous, just going along. But some of it was. I saw my cousin Derek snicker. I saw Daniel's face. And here's the thing that hurt the most. The thing that cut the deepest. Daniel's face showed something very close to embarrassment. Not embarrassment for Renee. Embarrassment for me, like I was the problem. Like my presence in my best shirt carrying a wrapped gift was the awkward thing in the room. He didn't say anything. He looked away. My own brother looked away. And then Marcus put his hand on my arm. Dad, stay calm. I've got a plan. I didn't ask what the plan was. I just breathed. I walked into that room. I set the gift down on the table. I shook Daniel's hand. I said congratulations. I made polite conversation for 45 minutes. I ate nothing. I drank water. And then I said I had an early job the next morning and I took my son and I left. In the truck on the drive home, neither of us said anything for a long time. The heater was running. Snow was starting to dust the windshield. Finally, Marcus said, "She's done this before, hasn't she?" And I realized he'd been paying closer attention than I thought. I said, "Yeah, buddy, she has." He nodded slowly. He looked out the window. And then, "How much do you know about the land Grandma left Uncle Daniel?" I glanced at him. "Why?" He just said, "Because I've been doing some reading." That was all he said. But I felt something shift in that truck. Something that felt like the first cold inch of a tide beginning to turn. Over the following weeks, things got worse before they got better. The engagement party humiliation became a story. Word got around, the way word always gets around in small towns, that Renee had made a joke about me at their party. Some people thought it was funny. Some thought it was rude but didn't say so. And some people, the ones who remembered my father, who'd watched me raise Marcus alone, who'd seen me show up for every job I'd ever been hired to do, those people were quietly furious on my behalf, but none of that changed anything immediately. Daniel called me 2 days after the party. Not to apologize. To tell me that Renee was just like that and I shouldn't take it personally.
He said she was a lot of fun once you get to know her. He said I needed to lighten up. I held the phone. I listened. I said, "Okay," and I hung up.
And something in me, something that had been clinging to the idea of family, of brotherhood, of what we owed each other, finally, quietly let go, not with a bang, with a sigh. Like a door closing gently on an empty room. The months leading up to the wedding were a parade of small cruelties. Every family gathering, Renee found a way to remind everyone what I was. Not in outright statements. She was too smart for that. It was in the way she'd say, "Oh, Gary, you're so good with your hands," when I mentioned something. It was in the way she'd quietly translate my job to her friends. He does like home repairs and stuff. It was in the seating arrangement at Easter dinner where I was placed at the far end of the table. Below Daniel's country club friends, below Renee's family. It was in the way she'd talk about the new house she and Daniel were building. A 4,000 square foot custom home on part of the inherited land, and glance at me while describing the marble countertops and the wine cellar, as if making sure I understood the distance between her life and mine. And Daniel just let it happen. That was the slow devastation of it. Not Renee, Daniel, my brother letting it happen. My brother who I had covered for 100 times growing up. My brother who I had lent money to twice, money I was never repaid. My brother who I had called family even when I had every reason to stop. He was choosing her and her cruelty over me, every single time, without ever having to say a single word about it. Marcus watched all of this. He was always there at family gatherings, quiet, observing, taking notes. And that spring he sat down at the kitchen table with me and opened his laptop. And he said, "Dad, I need to show you some things. Before I get to what Marcus showed me, I need to tell you about the night I really hit the bottom. Because there's always a bottom." Mine came on a Tuesday in late April. I'd had a long job that day, a full kitchen renovation out on Route 12. The kind of day that starts at 7 in the morning and doesn't end until the light is gone. I came home exhausted, ate leftovers standing at the kitchen counter. And then I opened my email. There was a message from Daniel. Subject line, wedding guest list update. He was letting me know, casually, in 2 paragraphs, that due to venue constraints and cost considerations, the wedding was being scaled back. And I would not be asked to stand with him. He would not need me in the wedding party. He was keeping it to Renee's brothers and a few close college friends. He hoped I understood. 2 paragraphs. No phone call, no conversation, an email. I sat down at the kitchen table. I don't know how long I sat there. The refrigerator hummed. The neighbor's dog barked twice and went quiet. I thought about my father. I thought about the way Dad used to call Daniel and me his two best things, his two boys. I thought about the day Donna died and Daniel had come to the house and held me while I cried, and I'd thought, whatever else goes wrong in this life, at least I have my brother. I sat at that table and I cried. Not loud, not dramatic. Just quietly, alone, the way a 51-year-old man cries when he's done pretending to be fine. I cried for my father. I cried for Donna. I cried for the brother I thought I had. And then I heard the front door. Marcus, he'd been at a friend's house. He came into the kitchen and saw me and didn't say anything for a moment. He just set his backpack down and pulled out the chair beside me and sat down. He was 17 years old. He put his hand on my arm and he didn't ask what was wrong. He just sat there. That quiet, devastating, selfless presence. His mother's presence. After a while, I told him about the email. He listened. He nodded. Then he said, "Dad, I've been waiting for the right time to show you what I found. I think now is the right time." He went and got his laptop. He sat back down beside me. And he opened a document he had been building for 4 months. What Marcus had done, and I want you to understand, this boy was 17 years old. He did this in his spare time between school and debate and his weekend shifts at the hardware store. What Marcus had done was conduct a careful, methodical, completely legal investigation into the land my mother had left Daniel. He started with the county property records, which are public. He spent weeks cross-referencing dates, deed transfers, and filed documents. And what he found was this. Our mother had updated her will 18 months before she died. That was the official story. That was what the lawyer had told me. But what Marcus found, buried in the county records, was that there had been an earlier amendment to the will, one that had never been mentioned to me. An amendment made when our mother was still sharp, still herself, still 2 years before her decline. In that amendment, she had explicitly stated that the family land was to be split, 60% to Daniel, 40% to me. Then, in the final amendment, the one made in her last year, during her decline, that 40% share to me had been quietly removed. And Daniel had been the witness on the final document. The witness, the sole witness. Marcus had also done research into Renee's family, the Callaways, the car dealership dynasty. And he found a lawsuit, not a criminal matter. A civil lawsuit filed 3 years prior by a business partner of Renee's father, alleging that the Callaway family had engaged in a pattern of fraudulent misrepresentation in a real estate deal. The lawsuit had been settled out of court, sealed, but the existence of the lawsuit was public record. And the name of the attorney who had filed it, a woman named Patricia Huang, based in Columbus, was also public. Marcus had written her an email 2 months earlier. Without telling me, he'd explained, respectfully, clearly, that he was the son of a man who believed he had been deprived of an inheritance, that there was a connection to the Callaway family, and that he was hoping she might be willing to review some documents. She had written back. She had said, "Send me what you have." I sat at that kitchen table at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night, and I read everything my son had assembled. I read it twice, and then I looked at him. This 17-year-old boy who had quietly, patiently, carefully built a legal case while I was out installing drywall and eating leftover chili alone in my kitchen. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry, so I did a little of both.
He said, "I didn't want to show you until I had enough. I think we have enough." I said, "Marcus."
"This is incredible," he said. "Grandma wasn't well in that last year. I don't think she knew what she was signing. And I think Uncle Daniel knew that." He paused. "And I think Renee was involved. Her family has done this kind of thing before." I took a long breath. "What do you want to do?" I asked him. He looked at me with those calm, steady eyes. "I want to call Patricia Wang in the morning," he said. "And I want to get your land back." The next morning I called Patricia Wang. She was exactly what I expected from someone who had spent years fighting Callaway-adjacent legal battles. Sharp, direct, no wasted words. She listened as I went through everything Marcus had compiled. She asked pointed questions. At the end of the call, she said, "Mr. Whitfield, what your son found is significant. Contesting a will is not simple, and it's not fast. But the witness issue alone is worth examining carefully. A beneficiary serving as the sole witness on a will amendment is something most courts take very seriously. She agreed to take the case on a contingency basis, no upfront charge. She would take a percentage if we won. Given the value of the land, which Marcus had quietly had appraised, because of course he had, that percentage would be meaningful. But for me, it was never entirely about the money. It was about the truth. The first step was obtaining all the relevant documents, the original will, the First Amendment, the Final Amendment, the witness signatures. Patricia filed formal requests. While we waited, Marcus and I kept completely quiet. We told no one. Not a soul. We went to Daniel's wedding in June. We smiled. We clapped. We ate the rubber chicken at the reception. Renee, in her wedding dress, looked across the room at me during the father-son dance and smiled. That particular smile. The measurement smile. And I smiled back and lifted my glass and thought, not yet. But soon, the wedding was beautiful in the way that expensive things are beautiful. The venue was the kind of place where everything costs triple what it should, and everyone is photographed having the time of their life. Renee moved through the room like a queen receiving subjects. And Daniel glowed. He was happy. I can say that honestly. And part of me, a small stubborn part that would never fully die, was happy for him. Even then, but that didn't change what had happened. That didn't change what he'd done, or allowed to be done. After the wedding, Patricia was methodical. She didn't rush. She built the case brick by brick. She brought in a handwriting expert to examine the final will amendment. She contacted the attorney who had drawn up the document, an older man, recently retired, who, when questioned, admitted he had not followed his usual protocol for the signing because the client's son had assured him their mother was completely coherent and had been waiting to make this change. The retired attorney was embarrassed. And he was cooperative. Patricia also found that in the 18 months before our mother's death, Daniel had been granted power of attorney over her finances. Power of attorney. He had never mentioned this to me, not once. I found out from a legal document. During the same period, Marcus graduated high school, top of his class. He gave a speech at graduation, something about how the people who shape us are often the people who challenge us, and how the response to adversity reveals character. I sat in the bleachers in the June sun and I clapped until my hands hurt. He had gotten into Ohio State engineering program, full academic scholarship. He had done it entirely on his own, his grades, his test scores, his letters of recommendation. I had no strings to pull. He had done it the way I had always tried to teach him, by being genuinely, undeniably good at what he did. Afterward, at the small party I threw for him at the house, Daniel came. Renee came. She hugged Marcus, a performance hug, the kind with no warmth in it, and said, "Oh honey, Ohio State, that's great. Are you going for something practical, business? Or," she paused and that smile came again, "trade school?" She laughed. Her laugh that was a bell with a crack in it. Marcus looked at her. Not angry, calm, he said, "Engineering, actually. Full scholarship." Then he smiled and said, "But I learned a lot from trades too. My dad taught me that you can build anything if you know the right way to do it." He held her gaze for exactly 1 second longer than was comfortable. Then he turned away and began talking to someone else. That was my son. Meanwhile, Patricia's case continued to build. In October, 16 months after Marcus first showed me his file at the kitchen table, Patricia contacted me with news. She had gathered enough evidence to formally challenge the final will amendment. The basis was threefold. First, the witness issue. Daniel, as a sole beneficiary, should never have been permitted to serve as the sole witness on an amendment that directly increased his inheritance. Second, testimony from the retired attorney establishing that proper protocol had not been followed. Third, a medical review of our mother's records from the period of the final amendment, examined by a geriatric specialist, who provided an expert opinion that our mother showed significant signs of cognitive decline during that period, decline consistent with early-stage dementia, and may not have had full testamentary capacity when she signed. Patricia sent formal notice to Daniel. She filed with the probate court. And that's when everything changed. Daniel called me 3 hours after he received the legal notice. I let it go to voicemail. His voice was tight. Controlled, but tight.
He said, "Gary, I got something from an attorney."
I don't know what you think you're doing, but I think we need to talk. Call me back. I didn't call back that day. I called Patricia instead. She advised me to let the legal process work. She said Daniel would likely want to settle rather than go through a full court challenge. The witness issue alone was damaging enough, and if it went to discovery, information about his power of attorney and the financial transactions he'd made during our mother's decline would become part of the public record. She was right. Daniel called again 2 days later. This time I answered. He skipped the pleasantries. Gary, what is this? You're challenging Mom's will? Why? I said because she wanted me to have 40% of the land, Daniel. You know that. Silence. I don't know what you're talking about. The First Amendment, the one made when she was still herself. The one that split it 60-40. More silence. When he spoke again, his voice was different, smaller. She changed her mind. Did she? I said. Or did you help her change it? When she was sick, when she couldn't really understand what she was signing. Gary, that's not... And you were the witness, Daniel. On the final document, the document that removed my share. You were the sole witness. The silence this time was long. I could hear him breathing. I said, I'm not trying to take the whole thing from you. I never was. I just want what Mom intended. What Dad intended. What's right, he said. Renee is going to... And then he stopped himself. And that right there, it told me everything. Renee had known about this. Possibly Renee had been part of it. The Callaway way of doing things, as Patricia Huang well knew, was to find the soft spots in people and situations and quietly apply pressure until things moved in their favor. They had seen Daniel coming. A charming man with a dying mother and a brother who was too busy grieving to pay close attention. They had seen an opportunity and taken it. 2 weeks later, Daniel came to my house. Without Renee. That was significant. He sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Marcus had shown me everything, and he looked older. He looked tired. He didn't look like the golden boy anymore. He said, I know I messed up. I said, tell me what happened. He was quiet for a long time. And then he told me. Renee had been the one to suggest the power of attorney. She'd framed it as practical. Someone had to manage things. Our mother was struggling. It made sense for Daniel to step in. And it had been practical. Mostly, but Renee had also, in that last year, been very involved in helping Daniel understand what was in his best financial interest. The land was valuable. More valuable than it had seemed before, because development had crept toward it from the east. Renee's family had been quietly interested. And the 40% that was supposed to come to me was, in Renee's calculation, land that could be better used by people who knew how to use it. Daniel admitted he had known the First Amendment existed. He admitted he had not told the attorney about it. He admitted that removing my share was wrong. And then he said something I hadn't expected. He said, I told myself it was okay because you'd always been fine. You always managed. I thought you didn't need it. I looked at my brother, this man I had known for 50 years. I said, I worked every day of my life, Daniel. I never once asked you for anything. The fact that I managed doesn't mean you could take what was mine. He looked down at the table.
He said, I know. I said, did you ever tell Renee to stop?
The comments at family events? Did you ever once say, Renee, that's enough?
He was quiet. No, he finally said. I didn't. Why not?
A long pause. Because she would have... He stopped. She would have what, Daniel? He shook his head. And in that headshake I saw something I hadn't expected. I saw a man who was not as in control of his own life as he appeared. I saw a man who was, in some ways, managed. I saw my brother, the golden boy, the charming one, the one who always landed on his feet, and I realized he was afraid of his wife. Not physically, but in every other way. I sat with that for a moment. Then I said, I'm not trying to destroy you. I'm not trying to humiliate you in front of the whole family. I just want what's right. Let's settle this. He nodded.
He said, okay. The settlement took 3 more months to finalize.
Patricia was thorough. What we arrived at was this. Daniel would transfer to me through a formal legal deed, the equivalent of 35% of the original land, slightly less than the 40% in the First Amendment, but accounting for certain improvements Daniel had made. The financial value at current market assessment was significant. More than I had ever expected to have at this point in my life. And then, when Renee's family's attorneys began making noise about contesting the settlement, Patricia released, quietly, through appropriate legal channels, information about the earlier civil lawsuit against Renee's father. She didn't need to make it public. She just needed the other attorneys to understand she had it. That she was willing to make noise about a pattern of behavior. And that the simplest, cleanest thing would be to let the settlement stand. Renee's family's attorneys went quiet. The settlement stood. But here's the part that people in town remember. Here's the part that spread the way things spread in small towns, quietly. From person to person, the way water finds every crack. Daniel's country club circle, the ones who had been at the engagement party, the ones who had laughed, many of them had known about the land situation in vague terms. When the settlement became known, when people understood that Daniel had improperly benefited from their mother's decline, and that a legal challenge had been filed and resolved, the silence from that social circle was deafening. People stopped calling. Invitations slowed. At a country club event that spring, Renee apparently made a remark about family drama, and a disgruntled relative, and a woman who had known my father her whole life said, loud enough to be heard, "Didn't his brother raise a son alone for years while Daniel was spending money?" Doesn't really sound like a gruntled situation to me. And then nobody laughed, nobody smirked. That woman told me about it later over coffee. We laughed together. And Renee's perfect social world, the one she'd been so carefully constructing, the one where she was always the most polished, the most successful, the most untouchable, it developed a crack. Not a fracture, just a crack. But in porcelain, one crack is enough. Because once people know it's there, they can't stop seeing it. The land settlement closed on a Thursday in March. I remember because Marcus drove home from Columbus just for the occasion. We went to the county recorder's office together. I signed the documents. The clerk stamped them. And I walked out of that building into the cold Ohio air with a deed in my hands. Marcus was standing by my truck. He had his hands in his jacket pockets and he was smiling. Not a big smile. Just that quiet, certain smile that was so completely, entirely his mother. I said, "You did this." He shook his head. "You did this, Dad. I just helped you see what was already there." We drove out to the land that afternoon. We parked at the edge of it and got out and stood there in the dead March grass and looked at it. It's beautiful land. Rolling, mostly. A tree line along the western edge. A creek you can hear in spring. My father had loved it. His father before him. 3 generations of Whitfields who had worked and saved and held on to something, not because it was worth money, but because it was worth keeping. I stood on that land and I thought about my father. I thought about my mother, the real her, the early her, the woman who had split her estate fairly between her sons before the illness took her clarity. I thought about Donna. I thought about all the years of showing up. All the early mornings and sore backs and long drives and modest dinners and the singular, consuming project of raising a good person. And I thought, it was worth it. All of it. Every day was worth it. Marcus stood beside me in the cold. After a while he said, "What are you going to do with it?" I thought about it. I don't know yet. Maybe just keep it for a while. Maybe build something someday. A workshop. Something small. He nodded. That sounds right. We stood there a little longer. And then he said, "You know what I remember most about Grandpa?" I looked at him. He always said the difference between a man who builds things and a man who takes things is that the builder is still standing when the taker is gone. I didn't know Marcus remembered that. I had to look away for a second. The creek was audible faintly through the tree line. Life has a way of running on parallel tracks, and while all of this was happening, Marcus had been building his own. In Columbus. Thriving at Ohio State. His engineering professors noticed him by his first semester. By his second year, he was involved in a research project. By his third year, he had been offered a part-time consultancy with an infrastructure firm. He called me every Sunday, without fail. 7 o'clock my phone rang, and it was Marcus. We'd talk for an hour, sometimes 2. About his work, about my jobs, about nothing in particular, about everything. That Sunday evening ritual became one of the most valuable things in my life. As for Daniel and me, it's complicated. The trust is not what it was. It may never be, but we talk. He calls. He came by the house in the summer, and we sat on the porch and drank iced tea and talked about our father. About small things. Small memories that only brothers share. It wasn't easy. But it wasn't nothing either. He is trying. I can see that he is trying. Whether out of genuine remorse or because his social standing has taken a hit and he's reassessing his priorities. I honestly don't know. Probably some of both. Renee, I don't see much. She is present at obligatory family events. She is polite to me in the way that people are polite when they have been beaten and know it and refuse to admit it, with a rigidity that is its own kind of acknowledgement. She doesn't call me the handyman anymore. She doesn't call me anything, really. She just smiles tightly and says something about the weather and moves on. That's enough. That's more than enough. What I have now, at 53, is not a perfect life. I still wake up early and work hard. My hands are still calloused. My truck is still old. I still eat leftovers some nights. But I have land that belonged to my grandfather. I have a son who is extraordinary. I have friendships that are real and old and worth having. And I have something I wasn't sure I'd find my way back to, not after Donna. Not after the inheritance, not after all of it. Peace. Not the peace of having everything figured out. The peace of having made it through something without losing yourself. The peace of knowing that when it really mattered, I stood up, not with anger, not with cruelty. With patience. With honesty. With a 17-year-old boy beside me who had his mother's eyes and his grandfather's words and more quiet courage than most men twice his age. There's something people often get wrong about strength. They think strength looks like the guy who never cries, the guy who hits back harder, the guy who doesn't need anyone. But the strongest thing I ever saw was my son sitting down at a kitchen table while his father cried, opening a laptop and saying, "Dad, I've been doing some reading." The strongest thing I ever did was walk into that banquet hall after a woman humiliated me in front of 50 people, set my gift on the table, shake my brother's hand, stay for 45 minutes, and leave without a single word of anger. Because the people who take from you, they expect you to rage. They expect you to break. They expect you to become small and loud and reactive, because that makes it easier to dismiss you. They don't expect you to go home and sit at a kitchen table with your son and start building something. Something legal. Something patient. Something true. Renee called me the handyman. She meant it as an insult. But every single day of my life I have been building things. Fixing things. Making things that were broken work again. I built a business with these hands. I built a son with these values. I built a case with these facts. And I built a future on land that was always supposed to be mine. If someone has ever dismissed you, if someone has ever looked at your honest, hard life and smirked, if someone has ever decided that what you built with your hands was worth less than what they inherited with their connections, remember this story. Remember that the people who smirk usually aren't watching the long game. They're playing for the room. You play for something that lasts. Stay patient. Stay honest. Stay standing. And when the time is right, and it always comes, let the truth do the talking. It doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to be true. And that more than anything is enough. If this story moved you, if you felt every bit of it, hit that like button and subscribe right now. Leave a comment below and tell me, has someone ever underestimated you the way Renee underestimated Gary? Have you ever had a moment where someone tried to make you feel small, and you held your ground? I want to hear your story. Because every single one of you has one. And every single one of them matters. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.